Ethics, senses of the self.
Good day everyone, my name is Judy R. Montoya Jr., 18 years of age, taking the Bachelor in Physical Education or BPED 1A. Today, we will discuss senses of the self. So before we're going to discuss on senses of the self, let us first know what is ethics. So ethics, it is about matters such as the good thing that we should pursue and the bad thing that we should avoid, the right ways in which we could or should act, and wrong ways of acting. It is about what is acceptable and unacceptable in human behavior. It may involve obligations that we are encouraged to meet. Ethics as a subject to study is about determining the grounds for the values with particular and special significance to human. So, senses of the self means your perception of the collection of the characteristics that define you, personality traits, abilities, likes and dislikes, your belief system or moral code, and the thing that motivates you. These all contribute to self-image of your unique identity as a person. Senses of the self. It is sometimes thought that one should not rely on any external authority to tell oneself what the standard of moral valuation are, but should instead turn inwards. In this section, we will look into three theories about ethics that center on the self: subjectivism, psychological egoism, and ethical egoism. Subjectivism. It is the recognition that the individual thinking person or the subject is at the heart of all moral valuation. She is the one who is confronted with a situation and is burdened with the need to make a decision or judgment. From this point, subjectivism leaps to the more radical claim that the individual is the sole determinant of what is morally good or bad, right or wrong. A number of cliches familiar to us would echo this idea. No one can tell me what is right and wrong. In a sense, there is some validity to this. No one can compel another to accept in a certain value judgment if she herself does not concur with it. However, we know that this statement cannot be taken as absolute. We realize in many instances that we had maintained an idea or an opinion that further discussion reveals it was actually erroneous. Erroneous means containing or characterized by error. Mistaken erroneous assumptions gave an erroneous impression. We realize that we can be mistaken and that we can be corrected by others. Next is no one knows my situation better than myself. Once again, in a sense, there is some validity to do this. This particular person who is put in a certain situation which calls for a decision has knowledge of the factors that affect her situation and decision. But to take this fact as a ground for not listening to others is to have a mentality that imagines that one's own situation or concern is so personal and unique that there is no way another person can possibly understand her and give her meaningful advice. But does not it make greater sense to recognize the reality that many human experiences are common and that others may have something useful to suggest? I am entitled to my own opinion. Here, once again, is a valid point that is often misused. Certainly, each person has the right to believe what she believes and has the right to express this. But this right is often stubbornly misconstrued as some kind of immunity from criticism and correction. A bigoted racist has an opinion against anyone who is dark-skinned, an anti-Semite has an opinion against Jews, and a misogynist has an opinion against women. We realize that these opinions are highly problematic because there is no basis for considering any of these groups of people as inferior. We would rightly be indignant about an employer who pays female employees less than the male employees, simply because he is of the opinion that women are inferior to men. But isn't he entitled to his own opinion? To insist on one's right into having opinions, whatever these happen to be, is to exhibit a close-mindedness that rightly invites censure from someone trying to think more critically about values. It is good if I say that it is good. With this line, we get to the heart of the problem with subjectivism. The statement implies it is my personal consideration of X as good that makes X good. X is good on the basis of my saying so. The problem now becomes, what is my basis for saying X is good? This renders subjectivism an attainable view for someone who is interested in ethics. It takes the fact that I am the subject making the valuation and uses this fact as the very basis for the valuation. But when I, as subject, am asking what is right or wrong, good or bad, with subjectivism, there is no other basis that I can look toward. Okay, there is something appealing about those statements because they seem to express a cherished sense of personal independence. But a close look at those statements may reveal problems, and in seeing that, we see the problems of subjectivism. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Trisha Nicole B. Gonzalez, BPED first year. My topic for today is all about the psychological egotism. When we say psychological is the aspect of mental science that study on emotional, social, physical effect because of the psychological problems. Egoism is that individual self-interest is the actual motive of all conscious action. So, the psychological egoism states that human beings' behaviors are always self-interest. Human beings are naturally self-centered, so all our actions are always already motivated by self-interest. It means that human beings act in their own action and our acts is always self-interest. This is the stance taken by the psychological egoism, which is the theory that describes the underlying dynamic behind all human action. So it means that the theory that all our actions basically motivated by self-interest, and it states that human beings' behavior are always self-interest. As the descriptive theory, it does not direct one act in any particular way. Instead, it points out that those is already an underlying basis for how one acts. It means that the theory is all about the nature of human beings. The ego or self has its desires and interests, and all our actions are geared towards satisfying these interests. For example, an act of generosity in which someone helps a friend with her thesis, rather than play video games, or someone makes use of her free Saturday helping build houses for Gawad Kanina. The psychological egoist would maintain the underlying such apparently other-directed behavior is self-serving desire, even if does not acknowledge it or even conscious of it. Perhaps it only helped his friend with other pieces because he is trying to impress her. Perhaps she helps out with Gawad Kanina because this is how she relieves her sense of guilt of being well off compared to others. The idea is whether or not the person admits it, one's actions are ultimately always motivated by self-serving desire. That's all. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. I'm John Kevin Z. Moriente. I'm here today to discuss about strong points in theory simplicity.
It has a unique appeal to it. A theory that conveniently identifies a single basis that will somehow account for all actions is a good example of this. The second is that of plausibility. The quality of seeming reasonable or probable. He offers no support for the plausibility of his theory. It is plausible that self-interest is behind a person's actions. Suggests that all behaviors are motivated by self-interest. In other words, it suggests that every action or behavior or decision of every person is motivated by self-interest. It is clearly the motivation behind many of the actions one performs which are obviously self-serving. It could very well also be the motivation behind individuals' seemingly other directed actions. It is only one plausible but also irrefutable. Psychological egoism is an irrefutable theory because there is no way to try answer it being confronted by the challenge that, whatever one might say, there is the self-serving motive at the root of everything. The psychological egoist can and will insist on his stand no matter how one might try to object. This opens up two questions. First, because we cannot refute it, shall we accept it as true? And do we accept the consequences on this theory?
Morning everyone, I'm Joshua Saradulia, and I will discuss about ethical egoism. What is ethical egoism? An ethical theory according to which moral decision making should be guided entirely by self-interest. Ethical egoism is often contrasted with psychological egoism, the empirical claim that advancing one's self-interest is the underlying motive of all human actions. Ethical egoism states, actions are morally right just because they best promote one's self-interest. Actions are morally wrong because they fail to promote one's self-interest. Example: prescribes selfishness or self-interest to be an ultimate motivation for individual actions. Egoism is about the way na ikaw mag-behave or act according sa self-interest. For example, akon tanan nga decisions nga ginaubra is not about sa kung ano ro gusto ibang tao para akon, kundi sa way nga gusto ko. Is ethical egoism same as selfishness? Yes, it may be selfish kasi mas nauna moro imong gusto kasi sa gusto iba, pero hindi naman siya morally wrong kasi ginagawa mo naman yung yan for your own good without causing them harm. Ag mas motivated ka sa lahat kasi yan ay according sa gusto mo.
Good morning everyone. My name is Christy S. Alonsagay. And this morning I will going to discuss the Plato's Republic. The central question in Book 1 in this Republic is, what is justice? Socrates seeks to define justice as one of the cardinal human virtues, and he understands the virtues as states of the soul. Then, according to Cephalus, justice consists in speaking the truth and paying one's debt. Thus, Cephalus identifies justice with right conduct. And Polemarchus also holds the same views of justice but with a little alteration. According to him, justice seems to consist in giving what is proper to him. The simple implication of this conception of justice may be that justice is doing good to friends and harm to enemies. And according to Thrasymachus, who presented the new and critical view, propounded the radical theory of justice, he defined justice as the interest of the stronger. And that is the different definition of justice according to the characters in Book 1. In Book 2 of the text, the character named Glaucon provides a powerful restatement of the case for egoism by a way of a myth. Glaucon maintains that three categories of good exist. The first category comprises good which are desirable for the sake of themselves and not for any reward or consequences arising from the possession of those goods. This good includes harmless pleasure and delights. The second category comprises goods which are desirable for their own sake and for the sake of the result. This good includes knowledge, sight, and health. The third category comprises goods which are desirable for the sake of their consequences but are undesirable in themselves. These goods includes gymnastics and ways of making money.
Hi ma'am, good day. I'm Jola Marie Crispino, first year BP Ed. Now, I'm going to discuss the topic of psychological egoism. So, psychological egoism is a theory of egoism. Egoism being a philosophy concerned with the self role or ego as a motivation and goal for one's own action. Specifically, psychological egoism believes that people are always motivated by self-interest even in what seems to be an act of altruism. This is a descriptive philosophy, meaning that it only claims how things are not how they ought to be, as opposed to our normative philosophy, which is about how things should be. Now the formation of the philosophy is credited to Thomas Hobbes, and Jeremy Bentham Hobbes writes in his famous book Leviathan, "No man giveth but with intention of good to himself, because gift is voluntary, and all a voluntary act. The object is to every man his own good, of which if man this shall be frustrated, there will be of benevolence or trust, nor consequently of mutual help." Bentham wrote in his introduction to the Principles of Moral and Legislation, "Nature has placed mankind under the governance of two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure. It is for them alone to point out what we ought to do, as well as to determine what we shall do. On one hand, the standards of right and wrong, on the other the chain of causes and effects, here fastened to their throne." And here Bentham agrees for a types of psychological egoism called psychological hedonism, which restrict the kind of self-interest we cannot do, telemetry, desire to pleasure, or the avoidance of pain. Now suppose psychological egoism is a true description of reality. In that case, every act we take in life is out of selfishness and self-interest, no matter how charitable the act seems. To every act that seems selfless is really done for reason like expectation of reciprocation, desire to gain respect, the desire for reward, or some other satisfaction like feeling like a good person. Psychological egoism is constructed with psychological altruism, which says that some acts we can are ultimately for altruistic motives. For example, someone may agree that volunteering to work an animal rescue shelter without pay, without the ability to adopt an animal or any sort or recognition is a pretty selfless act, but psychological egos will claim that this is actually a selfish act because it's fulfilling desire to feel good from acting altruistically. Psychological egos aren't narcissists who only care about themselves. It includes people who may dedicate their lives for what seems to be purely altruistic act. Now, Hobbes and Bentham don't offer a ton of proof of psychological egoism, and there is a little in the way of scientific studies fully confirming this. However, some people buy into the concept because it offers a simplistic and seemingly logical explanation of something complicated human behavior. That's all. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I am Reynald T. Adronia, a first-year BPED student. The topic that I am going to tackle is about ethical egoism. Ethical egoism. This is what ethical egoism ultimately translates into, not just some pleasant pursuit of one's own desire, but impositions of a will to power that is potentially destructive of both the self and of others. One can take on this view if one wishes, but it's also possible to wonder whether there is a way of recognizing our being in the world with others, of thinking of our own well-being concomitantly with the well-being of others. Perhaps this is what the study of ethics is all about. Psychological egoism. Psychological egoism states that self-interest motivates all humans' actions. A descriptive theory. Everybody is ultimately motivated solely by his or her self-interest. Describes the reason for a human behavior and actions. Thomas Hobbes and Friedrich are two pioneering personalities. Ethical egoism. Ethical egoism states that all people should be motivated by self-interest for their actions. A normative or prescriptive theory prescribes selfishness or self-interest to be the ultimate motivation for individual actions, recommends how human behavior for individual actions. Henry Sidgwick and Ayn Rand are two pioneering personalities. And that's all for today. Thank you so much.